Hi again. When you are ready to add color to your logo, this is what you want to do. Depending on how your logo and where it was initially created, you will want to make sure that you convert it to a vector. So if you happen to hand draw it, then you want to do the procedure like we did for collage to vector. Bring your drawing into Illustrator and image trace it, and then make your variations from there. You can live paint it and add color to that. So that we went over in the last project, so I'm going to get rid of some of these that were just some of my practice elements, maybe move them up out of the way. So what do you do with something that you created in Illustrator and want to cover? So for an example, I'm going to use this triangle. I'm going to go to the artboard tool and add another page. That'll just give me another page right next to that one and allow me to move around. So I'm going to, these are grouped from before, so I'm just going to move them over here. But you will notice if I want to fill them with a color, which is how you fill the inside of a shape, so I go to fill it with red, it won't work. My shape is selected to fill. It's because this is not fully an editable shape yet, and so there's a couple things you can do to it. One thing you will want to do, if you want this to be a closed down shape, is right click and ungroup it, and then actually make sure it is closed. So I can use the arrow keys to get these where I want them to, or move them with the mouse, or change the anchor points completely so that I have a completed shape. One thing you will notice is Illustrator sometimes seems to have a mind of its own. So I am trying to put this in the right spot, but it just won't let me. And that is because of the snap feature. So Illustrator and Photoshop all work on a grid. You want that to turn off. You go into View and make sure that Snap to Point, Snap to Pixel, and Snap to Grid are all turned off, which mine are. But under Perspective Grid, it's done for Snap to Grid. So I'm going to turn that off and see if now I can go in and get this right where I want it. Sometimes in Illustrator, to do small movements, you have to zoom way in, and then there we go. Close that side, select this one, and close that one. Aha! So now if I select it all, still can't color it red. That's because it is still 3 separate lines. So the easiest way to be able to color this shape is to actually take it and make it a raster graphic. So I'm going to select the entire shape with a marquee selection and go to Object and choose Rasterize. CMYK is a good setting. Resolution 300 is good. You want it nice and high quality. White or transparent background, I'm going to choose transparent because I don't want to have a bunch of white that I need to clear out. And these I'm not going to worry about, and just hit OK. So now you will see it is a clear background raster graphic that I can image trace. So I'm going to hit image trace, and because it was made in Illustrator, you'll see it usually image traces it pretty true to what it originally was. I can use my image tracing options to maybe turn up the threshold, maybe soften the corners a little bit, anything like that, and then close the box because preview is on, so it's tracing as we go. And then I'm going to hit expand and object, live paint make. I closed down the gap, so I could do gap options, but it can only find one. Ooh, let's find out where it is. It's red already, so I'm going to change it to light blue. And I don't see where that gap is, so I'm going to cancel and not worry about it. Deselect. Now I can go back in with a paint bucket, and red is loaded in my fill, and now I can click and color that. I can color the spaces around it. I can also even color the lines. So to be able to choose colors, I can come over here to my tools and use the color picker and get any color on the rainbow. One thing you will notice is some of the colors will come up with this little error symbol. This means it's out of gamut, which means that a printer cannot replicate that color. To fix that, you either move around and find one that doesn't have that, or just click on it and it will move to the nearest color that is in gamut. So now I know that that color can be replicated in a printer. Hit OK. I could even go in and color the lines of it. So before I started doing that, I would want to make some duplications of it for my different variations of my logo. So you'll notice in the colors, there is here the fill and here the stroke. So for this shape, I can only fill because I am using the paint bucket. I can fill anything that I can load though. So I can go into my swatch libraries and get patterns and fill, whoops, switch back to the bucket and use some patterns in my logo, or maybe I want the lines to be patterned, do something kind of cool and subtle like that. But there's no stroke on this because it's all just one object. So to use the stroke, for that I would use on objects that I created in Illustrator. So I'm going to move some of these out of the way, or delete them. Just select them and hit delete. Those were just part of my sampling, but maybe I'm narrowing down to, I'm liking this little group of shapes. So when you are coloring your logos, there's a few things you need to think about, and that is that you always want to start with a black and white variation. So if this was the variation of my logo, this is perfect, a good start with black and white. But with this flare here, it is not the best variation for a print logo, and that's because of the gradients. And so anytime you have a gradient, you don't just have one shade, you have many. And so see, I have this selected, switch to a gradient. That's not just black and white. It is many shades of gray. And when you're printing a logo, if you're printing it on a t-shirt or in fabric, you have to pay for every separate color. So this would be from white to black and every shade of gray in between. It would be a very expensive print. And so that's one of the reasons why we always start with the black and white variation, is you need to make sure the design works well in black and white and that it just really does the job. So you can load the default colors. You'll notice in Illustrator you have the option to switch the colors. And so what you have is the fill color, which is on the inside of a shape, and the stroke color, which is on the outside. To change those, you bring them forward, and then you can click on it and get to colors through here. And you also notice the color picker, color spectrum popped up. There's a color guide, which gives you different shades and tints from the color that you're on. So there's lots of different ways to get colors. You can go to this color picker. You can open up your swatches. And what you'll see is there are some already made swatches, and then I can actually save myself custom swatches. So say for instance I want a very specific color, maybe a little deeper, maybe try to get close to like a school teal. If you want the school teal, I can give you the numeric codes for that. Hit OK, and maybe I'm going to flip them so that it's on the inside. And now if I really like this color and want to save it, I can click it to bring it forward, open up my swatches, and then I can click and drag and drop it in my swatches, and now it will save in this document for me always. So then if I wanted to use this repeatedly, I could go in and choose it because it shows up in all of my swatches. So that's kind of a neat little trick. So if this was my main variation of my logo, I probably would not want to include this flare in it because it really is like a gradient. When you're making your logo, you're actually going to make 4 variations: a black and white, a color, and then 2 variations of your choice. So I say your first main color should limit itself to what logos limit itself to, which is within 3 to 6 colors. Black and white do count for this because if you're printing, white on a black shirt, you have to print white so that you can see it. So for my main variation, I might leave this out and then do this for one of my on-screen variations, because a gradient like that would work just fine for on-screen. So how do you go about duplicating them and getting them ready? I'm going to draw a marquee selection around the whole thing, And before I do this, I'm going to go back to where they were all black and white so that I have my black and white one already done. And then you can group them if you want, but you can't color them all together as easily if you group them. So you can do, you know, like the same fill and things, but if you group them, it is easier than to click and move them around, and you can always right click to ungroup them and deal with them individually. Okay, so I'm going to just marquee select them and then hold down Option and drag it away for itself, and then I can do that 2 more times so that then I have my, whoops, marquee select, good reason to group it, hold down Option and duplicate. Move this out of the way over here. Nice thing about Illustrator is you don't have to get rid of everything that you don't want at a given time. You can just kind of move it around and just move it off to the page. Okay, so this gives me some more room to work on my different ideas for it. And now, if that's how I want my logo, I can leave it that way. You will notice as I was changing some things, the stroke changed, so I can go back here and see, okay, that's a 6-point stroke. Maybe I want this one to match it too. So keep an eye as you're playing around with your logo and making changes that you're not changing things like that by accident. I kind of like it, so maybe I'll undo and leave it. I like some variety in my line width. So now I can select the shapes that are there, choose new colors for them. On the inside, choose new stroke colors. I can play around with the stroke width as well. And so that is how you can start adding colors. You can also go to Window and from the swatch libraries get the patterns and select any one of the patterns. I just turned them off because I already had them open. So you go to Window all the way down, swatch libraries, patterns, select the first one. If they're really small, you can go in here and go to large thumbnail so you can actually see them. And you can select the object, bring the fill forward, and fill it with a pattern as well. So that might be an option for some of your logo variations, or if you want some texture in your logos, or maybe you want some visual pattern. Be careful with these because they look the same for everybody. One way I've seen these used really well is actually in the stroke of a shape instead of in the shape itself. It can create just a really nice border or edge, so think about that. And one thing I will warn you about is when you have your stroke and fill, notice that when this is forward, so the fill is forward, no matter where I choose the color, so let me select this, no matter where I choose the color from, it's going to fill unless I come up here to stroke. But if the stroke is forward, it's going to affect the stroke. So that's a good way to troubleshoot. If ever it's, you know, you're over here and you think you're working on the stroke and it's doing the fill, make sure that fill is forward. And it also is the same over here. You can click them and bring them forward there. So see, now it's keeping for me the last things that I've used, so I have a little record of that. As always, make sure you save your work when you're saving in Illustrator. For the first time, you do File, Save As, navigate to the folder where you want to keep your logo project in your GDIM drive, and then hit Save. I already have one the same in there. I'm going to hit Replace. So now I have a new updated version of my logo. I hope you have fun adding color to yours. Thanks for watching.